gentlemen, welcome back. My name is Dan, and this is my series on weightlifting, the hero's journey. Now, if you haven't watched the first part of this series, I would say go back to the last video and just watch the end. You can skip to the section called the hero's journey. And that part is important if you don't care about the actual weightlifting stuff, and you want to understand the progression of the series. I would say go back and watch the hero's journey part, and we're going to continue with that here. This is Snatch, the leveling process. And just like the last video, I'm going to explain some things about the snatch, and more specifically the barbell snatch, just to be very clear. And this is the first lift performed in competition, and I guess we can just go through some of the slides or some of the notes from last time. So we're going to start with this explanation of the snatch. The snatch is my favorite lift of all time, right next to back squat. I would say it's probably back squat first, but then right after that is snatch, and the two are kind of related in some ways, right? Like we catch the bar in an overhead squat position, which is essentially a back squat with the bar over our head. But anyways, side tangent there. I'm going to explain the lift in terms of competition, some of the points in technique, and some accessory movements. And really the focus of this is going to be those accessory movements, because I believe that the snatch is the best introduction to weightlifting, and there's a lot of reasons I believe that, and I'll get more into that later in the video. But before I get started, I just want to say that this is not an instructional video. This is not educational. This is not meant to teach any of you how to snatch. If I were to do that, I would make a whole separate series, and I might do that, but that's not what this is here. And so just want to be clear with that before I start getting into things here. So first off, we sometimes call this the queen of Olympic lifts, and that is in regards to the nature of the lift. There is a very high demand on technique, and in the last video I said something along the lines of there's a lot of room for error. There is a lot of room for error when you're training at a light weight, when you're training with an empty bar or a PVC pipe. That room for error diminishes very, very quickly as you start adding weight, and that really is what I believe makes the snatch so good. It makes it such a good exercise because it's very strict, and so that's what makes it the queen. Is there's less strength involved compared to the clean and the jerk in the snatch, and the focus is more on technique, and so it's a very graceful lift as well. When performed correctly, it's one of the most beautiful movements ever. It's strong, it's powerful, it's fast, it's confident, it's very dynamic, and it really tests the full range of motion of almost your entire body. Every muscle group needs to be in a very extreme large range of motion to catch a heavy snatch. That's another thing I would want to mention about Olympic weightlifting if you are someone who wants to get into it. Generally, you gotta love the lifts. So the way I'm talking about the snatch right now, this is what got me into weightlifting. I saw this movement as this, I said this last time, this mythical beast, and I saw it as like this amazing challenge for me to approach. And that goes a long way in terms of how you'll progress in the sport. You have to really, really love these lifts. This sport is 3 lifts: snatch, clean, jerk. And that is what you're training for in the entire sport. You're not really doing much else. It can get bland after you get past the beginning phase. You know, you're pulling, you're squatting, and you're pressing. And if you're not doing those things, you're snatching, you're cleaning, or you're jerking. So, all that being said, yeah, fall in love with the lift. It might not be the snatch, but if you really do love these lifts and you get into it, that's the best way to excel in this sport. It's a good mindset to have anyway. Moving on, this is one movement starting from the floor and bringing the bar all the way overhead. One fluid motion. And that is essentially what makes it more complicated compared to the clean. The range of motion is much larger, and for that reason, there's a lot of things that need to happen. In the snatch, the clean, and the jerk, these are very systematic lifts, meaning, you know, they require something to happen in a sequence. And if you do that sequence in the wrong order, or if you don't perform one of those things in the sequence, it breaks the chain, it breaks the system, and if you mess up enough things, the lift just doesn't happen. And with the snatch, there's really not too much you can mess up, especially at a heavy weight. And so we're going to start getting into the idea of a pull, a snatch pull. That is one of the accessory movements that we're going to cover. But before I get into a snatch pull, I just want to show you all the snatch deadlift. There's all sorts of variations of deadlifts. When we say a snatch deadlift, my idea of a snatch deadlift is one that transfers to a snatch pull and also to a snatch as well. And to demonstrate that, I'm gonna put a video up here of the great Ilya Ilyin. Some would consider him the GOAT of weightlifting, but anywho, he is performing a snatch deadlift here. And you'll notice this doesn't really look like a deadlift, a conventional deadlift. For one thing, he has the wide grip. Of course, that's what makes it a snatch grip deadlift. You have the snatch grip, which is very wide. And you'll also notice he's keeping his shoulders over the bar. He's not just throwing them back behind the bar, because at some point he is going to be pulling this weight. And so this is called a snatch deadlift. And the two main points of focus, at least from my perspective, are keeping your shoulders over the bar, not letting them fall behind the bar, and keeping the bar close to your body. That second point applies to pretty much any lift, but definitely keeping your shoulders over the bar. And that will make more sense when we go into the next portion. This is like an evolution. Think of it as evolution of the snatch deadlift. The snatch pull is more complicated, and this is where we really get into the essence of weightlifting. And to demonstrate snatch pulls, I'm going to introduce a very decorated weightlifter. Her name is Kuo Hsing-chun. She actually just won a bronze medal in the Olympics, and she is often regarded as someone who has close to textbook technique, meaning she's near perfect. Obviously, no one's perfect, no one at all, but she comes very close, and when she's using really light weights, she's pretty much perfect. So we always look towards Kuo and model our own technique after her as best as possible. she is extremely strong. She can back squat 190 kilos, probably more. And so and I think she's a 56, 58. Yeah, so she squats over triple her body weight. Anyways, this is her training, warming up with some snatch pulls here, and you can see now the importance of those 2 points: keeping your shoulders over the bar and keeping the bar close. Now, we have to keep our shoulders over the bar because this is going to translate into a full snatch where we receive the bar overhead. And the only way to get the bar overhead, or I should say the only way to have the proper leverage to get the bar overhead, is to keep our shoulders over the bar. If they fall behind the bar, we've lost that leverage. And so this is what we would call the first and the second pull of the snatch. The general approach towards the clean and the snatch is a 3-series pull. And again, I don't think I mentioned this before. It might have been in the slide, but there's no rowing motion in these pulls, and so that's a big misconception that a lot of people think of when they're first getting started, is like, I gotta pull the bar. No, the pulling happens actually with your legs. The hamstrings are a pulling muscle, and they're actually very pivotal in the explosive phase of this lift. But side tangent there. The pull is something that you perform to kind of prepare for a full lift. You can pull to kind of start warming up. You can pull to feel out a weight. A pull kind of gets your body ready to launch the bar. And so, going back to the 3 pulls, the snatch, this what Kuo is doing here is the first and the second pull. The first pull is from the floor to the knees. The second pull is from the knees all the way through full extension. And when I say extension, I mean triple extension. That is the full extension of your ankles, knees, and hips, all of your lower body joints firing together at the same time. And if this doesn't make sense from a visual perspective and you would want to feel it out, this is simply the vertical jumping motion. If you really go for a high vertical jump, try to jump as high as possible, staying in one spot. Really bend down, load up the hamstrings, and then jump really high. That's triple extension, and it's a fundamental athletic movement that is applied in so many different sports, not just weightlifting. I just want to demonstrate here the evolution of snatch style pulls. So we start with something very basic like the deadlift, where we don't have any extension involved, and then we move on to a pull where we do go into extension. Now there's pulls, there's high pulls, you know, how long you want to control the bar for, how much upward momentum you want to give it. That's usually determined by how heavy it is. High pulls are usually done at lighter weights, but regardless, the final evolution is a snatch or a power snatch. And I'm not going to really go into details between the difference of snatch or power snatch. Just know that if they're catching really low in a full squat, that's a snatch. If they're catching higher up, that's a power snatch. And last but not least here, we'll go into some accessory movements. We covered the snatch deadlift, the snatch pull, power snatch and snatch. There's also hang snatch, muscle snatch, tall snatch, snatch balance. How many times have I said snatch in this video? That'll be a fun project if I ever want to go back on this. But at this point, I am going to transition to the second half of my video. and this video is called Snatch, the Leveling Process. And there's a reason I've been focusing on the accessory movements. But before I get into that, I just want to kind of recap the last video a little bit for those maybe who haven't watched it. I explained in that video what my dragon was, and my dragon was the 60 kilo snatch. Now, I don't want to go and recap the entire video, but this 60 kilo snatch was a massive goal for me. It was a milestone. It was something I really wanted to tackle and accomplish. And I called it my dragon to kind of give it this fantasy element, right? To kind of make it that much more epic. Like it was already something I wanted to do. Like I said, I love snatching. It's just one of my favorite things to do. It calms me down. It centers me. It kind of just brings me back to focus. And so I already love the lift, but to make it even more epic, I created this little fantasy in my mind. I'm like, a 60 kilo snatch is like this big dragon I could conquer. And so that's what I mean by my dragon. And once I defeated that dragon, I took its skull, and I could use that to remind me, how strong and powerful I became on my journey. More or less, that's the idea of the last video. Now, it took a while to get to that point where I could snatch 60 kilos. I'm going over that process in my retrospective series. And if you're watching this in the future, that is all done now, and you can kind of watch my leveling process. And 60 is an interesting number. And so there's probably two main reasons why I wanted the 60 kilo snatch. Reason number one was because 60 kilos, traditionally, if you're using a 20 kilo bar, is when you put the blue plates on. The blue plates are 20 kilograms. The bar is 20 kilograms, and so 20, 20, and 20 makes 60. And I love the color blue, and so I just really wanted to get to that point where I could snatch 60 very easily. 60 was an interesting number for another reason, and this is the fantasy element. And I assigned this number a lot of importance for that reason. And this goes back to a game that I played in middle school and high school as well. It actually dominated a lot of my teenage years. And this game is called World of Warcraft. And in this game, the max level was 60. And once you got to level 60, that was called Endgame. That was the end of the game, but it really wasn't. It was the end of the leveling process. The level cap was 60. Once you reach that level, you can't go any further. But that is when you can now participate in all of the dungeons and raids that only level 60s could participate in. And so most people, at least a lot of the group that I played with, they really wanted to get to endgame as quick as possible. They didn't value the leveling process nearly as much as I did, because I loved it. Personally, the leveling process in Vanilla WoW was one of the best experiences ever. And anyone who has played it and actually enjoys leveling and that part of RPGs knows what I'm talking about. It was phenomenal. It was so well done. It was hard. There was no hand-holding. It was difficult, but it was rewarding. And every level felt meaningful. Every time you leveled up, there was this kind of golden shower around you. And anyone who could see you would know that, you leveled up. And whatever, if you're level 5, level 10, it's not really a big deal. But once you hit level 60, especially if you were in a guild, clan, whatnot, they were called guilds, but if you're not familiar with that term, clan or guild, it's just a big group of people. And eventually, once you got to level 60, they would congratulate you, and they would start taking you into dungeons, and eventually take you into raids. And you would join. It would be 40 people, you and 39 other people, all on like a Ventrilo or TeamSpeak before they had Discord, and you would go in and you would raid. And in one of the first raids in vanilla WoW and classic WoW was a raid called Onyxia, and it was just one boss. There were some trash mobs, they call them. They were just little guys, but the one boss was Onyxia, this big dragon. And that boss, that raid battle, it provided some really, really high quality equipment, and I was really happy when I finally got what I wanted from Onyxia. She gave me Bloodfang hood, the helmet, the tier 2 helmet for rogues. I played a rogue back then, and this was probably one of the best looking pieces of armor in the game. And so you could wear that around, and then people would know, and then you could see, like, okay, he has the requirements, he has what he needs to progress and to get into even bigger raids, Molten Core, Blackwing Lair, AQ, Nax Ramis, all those original raids. But before I shouldn't say, I already nerded out a lot, but that was sort of the point, is the leveling process in World of Warcraft is amazing, and I want to draw some parallels between weightlifting and the leveling process in World of Warcraft. And I think a really good example of this is the talent trees. And every time you level up, you would get a talent point, and you could put it wherever you want in any one of your 3 talent trees. And I'm going to refer to the mage talent tree in this video because I don't really have quite a good example for the rogue, or I just haven't thought of one. But the mage had a really powerful spell in their fire tree. It was called Pyroblast. And while it was powerful, it wasn't the most useful when you first learned it, because it took a really, really long time to cast it, and you couldn't do anything else while you were casting it. And so I think it was literally a 10-second cast, if I remember correctly. I didn't play a mage, but I think you had to stand in place and do absolutely nothing for 10 seconds in order to get this spell off. And if you play WoW, you would know that anytime you get hit by an enemy, it interrupts the spell. And so this was only really usable if you were in a group. But the real way to take advantage of Pyroblast was to level up, was to get more talent points, and eventually you could reduce the cast time of the spell. And when you had enough talent points, and I believe you needed to be level 60 to do this, you could get Pyroblast in the fire talent tree, and then you could get a spell called Presence of Mind in the arcane tree. And Presence of Mind was a spell that made your the spell after an instant cast spell, no matter how long it takes to cast. And there was literally a build in the game called Palm Pyro, Presence of Mind Pyroblast, because you could just do those 2 buttons, and if you were attacking something that was not your level, if you were higher than it usually just kills it instantly. It was very, very powerful. But you can't reach that point, you can't assemble that build until you've reached the end of the game. You need to be at Endgame. You need to have hit 60 and have all of your talent points. And this was only one strategy. It's not like you could just pyroblast everything to death, and Presence of Mind had a cooldown, and so this was just one way to deal damage. And the parallel I want to draw here is between talent points and accessory movements in weightlifting. I like accessories because you're able to pull apart the lift into bite-sized pieces, and you can focus on different aspects or positions of the lift, or spell, if you will, and over time you can perform them faster because you've strengthened those positions and you've moved through them so many times. And so mastering accessory movements in weightlifting is a lot like earning talent points over time. And that's how I conquered my dragon. That's how I was able to do the snatch. I knew I could snatch balance 60 kilos. And if I could snatch balance 60 kilos, then my confidence in actually snatching 60 kilos goes way up. That's the point of a snatch balance, is to build confidence in dropping underneath that weight on your back. And so I want to end it here by giving you all another depth psychology challenge. And this requires you to first find your dragon. Do that part. Find something really, really incredibly challenging in real life that's going to require you to go in, requires you to dig deep and learn about yourself. So find that first. Find that thing, whatever it is. And then once you find that thing, build a strategy to conquer your dragon, to defeat it, whatever you have to do. And embrace the leveling process. Enjoy every step of the way. Be happy with the little tiny gains that you make, because they add up over time. These are talent points, and when you have 1 or 2 talent points, you can't do much with it, right? But when you have 60 talent points, you can do whatever you want. But you need to earn those talent points. You can't rush that process. And if you just start dreading the leveling process, and you're just, I want to get to Endgame, I want to raid, I want to get the gear, you're going to get there eventually, but why not enjoy the process? Learn your character, learn your class, learn how it works, learn the mechanics of how you deal damage or how you tank or heal. Deck out your character, get all the talent points, get to 60, get endgame gear, do it all, because eventually the level cap is going to increase. There's going to be a Burning Crusade and a Wrath of the Lich King, and it's no longer going to be 60, it's going to be 70, it's going to be 80, and you'll have that dragon skull though. You'll look back on your first journey, and you'll have everything you need to push on and continue. And that, my friends, is the leveling process. That is my experience with the Snatch. I hope you all enjoyed. Until next time.